Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Mehdi. I'm the CEO and Catchpoint, the CEO of Catchpoint Systems. I'm super happy to be here, part of the solution review inside Jam. We're going to have a fantastic panel to talk about network and the stress of remote work and the impact it has on the network. And so I'm going to welcome our panelists, Michael and Steve, and let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Michael Kaczmarek. I am VP of Products for the Security Solutions Division at Neustar.
I'm Steve Douglas. I head up 5G strategy with Spirent Communications, who are one of the leading test and service assurance vendors in the communication space.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining. We're going to obviously have hopefully a lot of questions in the chat, but to start with, I was talking to a CIO a few months ago, and he said, Mehdi, I have 2,000 employees that were in New York, and now I have 2,000 offices, 2,000 routers, 2,000 network connectivity profiles, and kids streaming, kids doing Zooms, kids doing Netflix. How is that? How am I going to be able to enforce and provide a great employee experience? So we're going to start with the first question. What have you seen in terms of major impacts of remote workers on the business networks, from your point of view?
So I'll jump in.
Sure.
What's interesting from our perspective is that, and I think everybody's experienced this, is that your business critical systems, or the definition of what was considered business critical, shifted overnight. Probably nearly every organization threw out their business continuity plan, which was always intended to have a remote facility. Now your remote facility turned into, exactly as you mentioned, Mehdi, we went from 2 to 1,000. And that completely shifted the need to fortify things like your VPN infrastructure, any online collaboration tools. Every one of those things now became not only a new service that was required and became important to keep business running, but also became a new attack vector and a new threat vector.
Interesting. Well, Steve, I believe you're in the UK. What have you seen in that part of the world, and from your perspective?
Yeah, I would sort of agree with what Michael said. A lot of the continuity planning did go out the window with what we saw. And it wasn't just security. I think we started to see this phased approach where things like simply, could their networks handle the surge in volume that suddenly possibly wasn't anticipated before? And didn't really even understand what that surge in volume was going to look like. And it's taken, a number of companies a while to sort of understand when it's coming into the networks and how to cope with that. And then, you add to that security, what type of security was going to be needed, in terms of, for the corporate networks, for different types of employees, for potentially partners that are coming on board. And the other big area that was sort of hit us, where we saw, at least, at the very start, was even the tool sets that, what the employees needed to use, or what tools they needed to use. And well, there was a lot of, let's say, contingency plans, where these were the ones that were recommended. There was, I think, a very rapid discovery. Those necessarily weren't the best tools for the job, or were not even the best tools for what their end customers allowed them to use. I mean, we saw that, with many of the video conferencing tools as well, where suddenly your end customers say, well, actually, we don't accept, using that. So you've got to use something else. And all of a sudden, you're back to the drawing board and thinking, well, what are we going to, what do we need to put in place rapidly to allow, our teams to properly not only engage internally, but externally?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, we're a small company. We're 250 employees, and literally March 11th, we did a dry run as we were seeing the wall fall down. We sent every employee home, and we said, okay, we're going to do a dry run because, as you said, business continuity plans never had in mind that everybody was going to be remote. And we realized, one of the biggest thing was just the comfort of the employees, the desks, the chairs, because not everybody has a home office, just little things like that. And then I love what you said, Steve, because we standardize on Zoom where we are, and but now we have to support literally 5 video conferencing systems because the customers, there are customers that use Blue Jeans and Cisco or WebEx, and it's just incredible the multiplication of tools that this is creating. one of the things that we talk about is the network connectivity from the last mile. I mean, we are in the monitoring space, so we monitor things from all around the world. And to be honest, I've been very pleasantly surprised by overall how the last mile networks, whether it's the BTs, the Comcast of the world, etc., have handled the surge. Have you guys seen anything different or heard anything different?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in,
Yeah,
Michael,
Steve.
first, if you don't mind. Not different. I mean, I think that's a fair assumption. You know, what you've seen is what actually many of the networks have, you know, historically sort of prepared for. They, you know, most networks are usually dimensioned with quite a bit of overcapacity in them, not necessarily for this type of, you know, for a pandemic of, you know, of this scale, but usually for, you know, major events, because most networks are designed sort of in a mission critical fashion, and there's a lot of overhead and capacity in them. So I think, you know, we saw most of the networks cope pretty well with it. We did also see, though, you know, there was major initiatives going on at the same time. You know, a lot of networks were already in the middle of upgrade processes, so we did see changes there. So, like, for example, in North America, you know, the big mobile network providers like Verizon and AT&T were starting a process of rolling out their early 5G networks. Yeah. And that actually that continued, and it positively continued right throughout, you know, the pandemic. What they had to do was they had to adapt some of their working processes where they maybe had multiple, you know, employees or teams out on sites. They had to change just how they work, but they still managed to, you know, to continue that work. Alternatively, we saw a different sort of impact in the European environments, where a lot of areas like the rollout of the 5G networks literally got delayed. I think a lot of the major service providers thought to themselves, we really want to focus back down on the 4G LTE networks or fixed networks and just make sure they are completely robust. Even though we've got all this spare capacity in there, you know, we are anticipating that not only will there be extra load on it, but to Michael mentioned earlier on, the potential of threats as well and attacks coming in, because unfortunately, attackers exploit these types of major, you know, world events, and there was a sort of an emphasis towards that. So we saw it sort of from both sides of the equation in the last period.
That's very interesting. And Neustar, I mean, you guys see a lot of things. What's your take on that, Michael, in terms of the availability of the last mile networks, and even from a security standpoint?
So it's interesting what Stephen had said with one of the big things that we saw, one of the biggest was a change and a shift in DNS traffic, a significant change. I think one of the statistics that we pulled together was the amount of traffic that we serviced in just the first 3 quarters of this year was 220% higher than all of last year. And so a huge increase in the amount of online activity, which result in more people doing more queries, more people looking for sites online. And it makes sense, as when you're working out of an infrastructure or an enterprise, you're doing a query, you're caching that query locally. Right. So now every system below is taking advantage of what you have in the cache. Throw 2,000 workers remote. Now you've amplified the amount of traffic by that amount.
Right.
But what we saw was interesting, even now when you look at it, we consider it like a post-COVID wave, that even though we saw this massive spike during, you know, the first, you know, the month of March and April, we anticipated that as caches refreshed, as caches updated, that number would go down. It's only continued to increase, right. Which means more online activity is going on, less people, you know, more people doing more things online. It's so one of the huge network changes we'd seen from across our infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I see, I mean, I have 2 young kids that are being schooled at home. One of the things I've noticed is they ask for more devices. The computer is not enough, so there is a computer and the tablet. So just that increases the DNS traffic, the everything's traffic. What's interesting is, like, you would have thought that maybe the last mile networks would have improved and rolled out capabilities to do better DNS caching. Or maybe people are just using more Google DNS and Cloudflare DNS for better performance, maybe. Well, it would be interesting.
They should use Neustar DNS for the best performance.
Correct. Absolutely. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I don't have. So I mean, this is a great segue because into what's going to be next in terms of how are we going to prepare. I mean, I feel like a lot of companies are not going to go back to the office 100%. I mean, when we do surveys about our own employees, we get about 30% of them wanting to go back. The majority want to have a hybrid model just because it's not bad. I don't have to commute, and I'm more productive maybe. So how is this, do you think, is going to impact and change the buildup of the network infrastructure at the corporate level with the SD-WANs, the VPN services and things like that? Michael, if you want to take that.
Sure. I look at this as, I'll take it from a security side of the house. This is going to put a significant stress on your IT teams because typically, you know, they're always used to running a hybrid environment, but it's usually been probably 90% one, 10% the other. Right. Now you're going to be in a situation where it's going to be 50-50, 60-40. So you've amplified the number, you've basically doubled the number of tools. It's exponential on the attack surface. And your security team probably didn't get bigger as a result of the pandemic. So now your security team is going to need to rely more on outside or third-party tools or third-party expertise to try to help them get a grasp on what they need to, number one, what's important and what they need to protect, and number two, how they go about applying those protections and doing so in a manner that they can monitor and manage. Because this shift we're never going to go back to the normal, in my opinion, that we were used to, where the majority of people and time was spent out of the office. Your IT and security teams have a huge challenge ahead of them because of what's happened. And as I said, and security just has gotten even harder now to manage.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow on Michael's point there, I mean, one of the big areas we're seeing an evolution towards is more and more automation technologies coming in. And that's even around security, you know, looking at ways to potentially automate the types of red or blue team sort of attack defense that we would have historically, you know, had maybe pen testers doing. We're seeing a demand for, could you automate that? Could you create emulated attacks that'll happen all the time to try to test out our networks, to try to to discover the risks and the mitigations that we may want to put in place in a more sort of proactive way. Right through to the automation, to I would say to back into the original office environment. So we're seeing a lot of, for example, large manufacturing and factory environments looking at ways, could they, if they're going to have remote workers for periods of time that won't be able to get into those physical premises, like labs, for example, could we actually automate a lot of the processes in there and turn them into, in essence, black boxes where remote workers could log in from anywhere in the world, right, reserve resource, have the lab or the environment dynamically configured for them, and try to get better efficiencies that way. And that's, you know, that's requiring quite a lot of, you know, innovative automation technologies to be brought in, but also a heck of a lot of security as well, because you're now taking mission critical processes and enabling them from, you know, potentially someone's home office or their bedroom or wherever they're working. Right. And how do you do that? Especially when these environments can be life critical as well, especially a factory floor. So yeah, I think
you think about like a Johnson & Johnson or Lilly developing a medicine for COVID, right? I mean, you need to secure that so we don't create another mess on top of an existing mess.
But also to build on what Stephen said, think about some of these IoT systems, the factory floor being a perfect example. A lot of these places were air gapped. They're proprietary systems. They were segregated from the public network. If you can't have individuals in there operating them, you now have to expose something that wasn't initially designed to be run remotely, and now you have to do so. So you're gonna see significant changes that are gonna have to be made on how do you secure or guarantee or ensure that the right person is accessing that device, so that you can continue to maintain operations and production.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is going to lead to a series of innovation. I mean, I was reading about the 1918 flu, Spanish flu, and how much more innovation it brought up. I feel like we're at that moment again where we're going to see just a ton of innovation, even on the job side. Like the past few years, we've seen the creation of a DevOps job, the site reliability engineering. The network engineering team is the one that hasn't truly changed, and I think this is going to be one of the moments that is going to really impact the network and the network engineering team, and also the security team, as you've mentioned a few times.
But I think maybe it also changes possibly, not only the team but the skill sets, in that team as well. And if we just to follow on that sort of automation theme, to make automation valuable, it needs to be intelligent, and to make it intelligent, in essence, it's evolving towards sort of machine learning and AI models. And the traditional engineer who may have been implementing that maybe has to take on now a role of governance of that. How do you govern that the AI, the machine learning, is the efficacy of it? Is it doing it right? And those are types of new skill sets we're starting to to see people look at, because I think the benefits. I mean, this is what I've found quite amazing. The one positive, let's say, of this whole COVID world is that many of these companies that have been forced into adopting these types of practices are starting actually to see proper financial benefits of doing it. Better efficiencies in their environments, able to reduce the amount of equipment they've needed. I mean, we saw huge improvements in the lab environments, for example, where people would have maybe had lots of different types of servers, which would have been probably far too many than they actually needed for a lot of the work that was going on. But what tends to happen, people would reserve them, didn't want to give it up, because they were working on it. It was too hard to configure. Now, if that's all automated and taken away from them, you can really reduce your resource footprints. You can great efficiencies, across the board. And I think that's a positive business case that's starting to appear out of it, which is sort of helping a lot of companies make that decision that maybe they don't need to go back to the full office environments, or even have as many types of office facilities as they have in the past.
And the office is going to look different. It's going to serve a different purpose, in my opinion, when we go back to being able to go to an office. Sorry, Michael, you were saying.
Oh, no, I was gonna build on what Steve was saying. Is that I also think he's heading 5G strategy. I think you're going to start seeing with this shift, you have to have and support more devices online. Then you couple on top of that 5G, you're finally going to see adoption of things like IPv6 occur, which has been around for, I think, probably 20 years.
Right.
So I mean, IPv6 is getting close to being legal drinking age. I mean, it can vote. Yes. And it's one of those things that is taken. I mean, only 30% of systems or use are IPv6 enabled today.
Yeah.
And so you're going to see a massive change in that because of what's happened as a result of the pandemic. And then couple on top of that 5G and that rollout, you're going to see a lot of things start direct connection to the network, which then changes the entire way you're going to have to manage security. I think we're going to see some significant changes over the next year to 2 years as a result of all of this.
I agree with you on the IPv6. We just wrote a blog. I think we just passed the 25% mark on the IPv6 AS numbers out there. Like we just crossed the 100K AS numbers for IPv6. I just can't wait the troubleshooting part, trying to trace route to an IPv6 from a home office. So that's going to be very interesting for the network engineers. Steve.
Yeah, no, I just really to add to Michael and your point, Mehdi, earlier on about, it's also about, the number of devices that are simultaneously connecting, even in your office or home environments. And I think 5G certainly is going to help with that. But I mean, it's also other technologies like Wi-Fi 6, is rapidly rolling out now as well. And that's a huge benefit as well, because it opens up that potential for multiple more devices simultaneously connecting, within your home environments. I think we've all seen this, I have multiple devices connected now for work. The family have lots of devices. My home is, more things connected than I probably would like to mention or share these days. And having environments that can cope with that and cope with that type of, simultaneous connectivity, and then also being able to not only manage that, but manage the security around it. Because I mean, Michael mentioned the sad fact is, there is many of these endpoints are still very, very weak, and a lot of people who bring them into their home environments don't necessarily realize how weak they are. And that sometimes means that as network providers, the network providers ends up having to step in and take the assumption, well, I can't trust the devices always that are coming in, so I have to put in the infrastructure to secure it from a network point of view. But the negative effect of that, what we're seeing is that sometimes, the ambition of the network is to do things like get really low latency for some types of applications. And of course, the trade-off is the more security I put in the way of those connections, do I unfortunately have to increase the latency? So,
right.
What is that trade-off? And that's a big sort of area we're seeing a lot of focus on at the moment.
It's one question I have for both of you is, we were talking to a few CIOs about this and a few folks in the security space, but this the home being the office now, one of the challenges is how do you manage that entire network at home? So where does the company's network premise finish and end? And so when you have Alexa devices, Siri devices, all kind of things, and on top of that you have a laptop that is used by a banker or by somebody working for a security company or whatnot, are we going to see a movement towards like where the company ships an entire environment, whatever that environment includes, is like an office in a box, right? Where this is the company router, this is the company switch, this is the company Wi-Fi access point, and then your home is, connect your stuff there. But I'm going to try to secure the entire end-to-end from where you're sitting, Michael at Neustar, all the way to the Neustar network.
I think, in my opinion, I would think that you would see a shift away from actually hardware into more of a shift into virtualization. I would expect that if I'm a security professional, I'm either going to start deploying more endpoint management, more services that are going to route through my VPN and then enforce policy, either DNS filtering or gateway or website filtering at my VPN. So I'm going to beef that up. Or I'm going to start migrate to a virtualized environment where I can then spin up and turn down a desktop so that the box in and of itself that's accessing my critical systems is dumb, and that I'm maintaining security in the virtualization in a container. So I would think we'd go down a path of probably more containerization over time, as opposed to everyone. You're going to get a dumb device, and so to speak, that its sole purpose is only to connect you into the cloud, for which then you can manage across from there and enforce policy.
Right. It's going to be interesting to see the types of latency and reliability and reachability problems we'll get from there. We talked a little bit about 5G. Obviously, we're starting to see the rollout finally of 5G. How do you think that's going to impact the remote workers?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways we're already starting to see today. I mean, first of all, we saw in some markets where a number of companies were actually sort of nearly enforcing the use of cellular technologies rather than Wi-Fi in the home, and that was really actually for security reasons. Whether that's right or wrong, I mean, I think that's still an open debate. But I think 5G does offer, certainly, with its higher capacities and the security of the cellular network, certainly a very nice alternative. I think it was what I would call the really remote workers, though, are the ones that are actually potentially going to see a benefit. I mean, one of 5G's ambitions is really to reach out into the rural communities and really, enable that there, sort of where cost has been prohibitive in the past of building out, infrastructure. 5G has lots of pretty cool new technology capabilities that allow it to basically backhaul itself over the air and then actually provide that last mile as a sort of a fixed wireless access point into communities. And I think that's going to be a big trend that we're going to see more and more of. We're seeing a lot of it in North America at the moment, similarly in Asia Pacific, and I expect to see probably the same in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa as well, where it's just a cost topic. And the other area is we saw sort of an increase, was not just the workers, but also what I would call the education facilities. We saw a lot of major educations, like academia, universities, exploring how they could actually use the technology like 5G to actually enable better remote education capabilities. So, and this isn't just about providing connectivity, it's about providing different ways people learn and different types of learning outcomes. And we saw a lot of this already, where we saw, for example, a couple of major universities are trialing using things like augmented reality, which can be delivered over these high bandwidths to basically bring teaching alive. So, for example, they were teaching history lessons, where you, in essence, were doing a virtual tour of a museum.
Right.
And you thought you were there, and they brought the students along with them on that. I mean, and they're quite, it's still early days in this, but these are the types of things we're going to see creeping in. This is the same capability, by the way. Our factories are starting to use with augmented reality to do remote maintenance. The military, the Department of Defense in the US has been doing this for years, for training troops. We're now starting to see this fruition, how it's sort of this merging of remote technologies can all come together to enable different outcomes across that sort of homework, I would say, environment that we're now living in. And I think 5G is going to be a big catalyst for that.
Yeah. Michael, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I don't want to play Debbie Downer, but with every one of those items that Stephen brought up, it also adds additional risk. When, like, one of the key things that when I think of 5G, there's 2 points associated with it. It's the reduced latency and the increased bandwidth. And as a result, those 2 things can, in essence, make things like DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, very difficult things to manage. And then when you put on top of that the direct connectivity to the network, and then you have things like IPv6 where you have the direct IP. When you think of a standard botnet of about 2,000 bots, which is a small botnet these days, that could launch the largest attack that we've seen on the internet, which is a 2.25 terabit attack that attacked Amazon's AWS service.
Right.
That could be done from 2,000 devices now, 2,000 5G devices. So it becomes inherently important that organizations start looking at, how am I going to manage bandwidth, upstream connectivity, whereas latency and that level of connectivity does enhance things like the medical profession. I think, as Steve said, education, even online gaming and gambling can benefit. It also makes it even more important to know who or what's on the other end of that connection, because you've got like devices that are connecting directly to the network. The WAN or the LAN has become, or the WAN's become the LAN in essence. When you think about it, your local area network or your wide area network is now really your local area network. It makes it a harder challenge. 5G does add much more challenges in that area to manage security, accessing into your systems, but also protecting your systems.
Yeah. I mean, I think all we've been seeing for the past 20 years is just more complexity: mainframe, servers, virtual machines, containers, 5G, fixed lines, etc. So I think we're just for the ride in terms of complexity. Steve, I would love to go back to a point you touched on, which is very dear to me, which is education. So obviously, one of the things that we are seeing with COVID is the digital divide, in a way, right? That is now in our faces. We might be lucky that our kids have a computer at home, they can do Zoom. The majority of people can't, right? And so yeah, it's nice that we are going to be able to have 5G, and that can help. But I help this organization called DonorsChoose.org here in the US, where people can help fund school and teachers' demand. A lot of people don't even have a computer or a phone or a tablet. So I think that there is an access point, which is great. The fact that we are finally going to reduce latency and bandwidth, but we still need to give access to these folks compute capabilities.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree, and I think we saw that here. I'm based in London here in the UK, and we saw that when the schools sort of were shut down and everybody had to work remote from home. I think a lot of people just had a general assumption, well, most families would have something, and then there was a rapid realization that a lot of families didn't have access, to computer systems or equipment to get kids online. I think this is a part of where government does need to take also a role in some policy, better policy has to come in, it needs to be put in place. And we've seen some of that, these approaches where we're trying to uplift people who don't have, or communities that don't necessarily have access, getting them through schemes like you've just mentioned, where they can get maybe secondhand or equipment brought to them, but also even just getting the connectivity out to them as well, when they sometimes do get that. If they're not connected, You know, how can we get those communities then connected to use it? And there's approaches like these, what they call outside-in approaches, that are being sort of championed at the moment by a number of, you know, governments and policymakers. So I think, you know, we're seeing it, you know, I think we're seeing it both ways, and I think it has to happen that way. You know, because if we just, I mean, you know, that's one of the great learnings of this, you know, horrible pandemic, is that there is a big digital divide, and it's you know, and I think it's opened the eyes to many people that it exists, and I think it's in our interest, because it's easy for me to quote a lot of stats, you know, saying how many 4G and 5G devices are out there in the world. These are huge numbers. You just assume, oh well, everybody must have, but they don't, and that's the reality of it.
I mean, I think digital access is going to be now a universal right. It's like breathing and drinking water. We must guarantee that every person can get online. That should be in the constitution of every country.
Well, I heard a real interesting, you know, a very disruptive analyst threw out this idea. Well, why don't we make for example, why don't we make 5G for free in large public spaces and public areas? I know that, you know, a lot of the big, you know, communication service providers, oh, don't do that, you know, it's going to, you know, ruin our business model. But he was pushing an idea out there saying that, you know, connectivity and getting online is so important for the world we live in and the way it's rapidly evolving. And if we disenfranchise large areas of the population, we actually damage our own economies and our own ability to, you know, to innovate and be leaders. So it's actually, there's an argument just saying, you know, if we can just give blanket connectivity for people and make it as, you know, cheap as possible, if not at some points even free, you could stimulate potentially mass innovation, you know, increases in education, put your economies, you know, on a faster track now, you know.
And we've seen that when compute became cheap with the release of cloud computing. You know, we have Netflix and we have all these incredible solutions that wouldn't have been in existence if it was too expensive. One of the, if we switch back a little bit to Michael on the security side, you know, if you had to give some advice to the listeners and the viewers here in terms of, you know, what should they do, the security teams? What are some of the things they can put in place to reduce the risk? And obviously, this past week has been a horrible week from a news perspective with the SolarWinds attack or hack, or however you want to describe it. The damage, I was reading like 88,000 or 18,000 companies were impacted. What are some of the things you can give our audience here in terms of advice?
I think I always look at it, there's 4 things that you should look at. And it's, whenever you're going through and doing any type of security implementation, the first thing you need to figure out is what's the most important thing to you or your business. You need to identify that. Once you know that, or what does a hacker or an attacker find the most valuable? When you figure that piece out, then to figure out what environments it sits in, if it's public cloud, private cloud, wherever that may be, then look to what is going on in the rest of the world or within your vertical on how they're securing that type of system, and then apply the security. And then I said 4 things, but the 5th thing would be then rinse and repeat. It's difficult already for an organization to protect what they consider key business systems. And then the pandemic turned other pieces as they almost overnight became key business systems. So you have to take a look back in, start from ground zero and look at what is the most essential things that are needed to keep your business running, fortify those first, and then build from there. Don't look towards a single tool or service. There's no like panacea, single panacea that's going to solve this problem. No, anybody who wants to try to sell you a box that says it does 17 things means it does 17 things poorly. Look for the best in breed that's going to meet your business need, and look for providers that will work with you to meet your business model, not shoehorn you into theirs. Those are probably the most critical ones that I would say. Forrester put down 5 steps, you know, being proactive, some of these other things they said, but all in all, find a provider that is going to work with your business needs, not you work with theirs. That's, if anything you want to leave with, I would say go with that.
That's pretty good. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think Michael's major than all the points I probably would have said. Apart from, one additional thing I just would add to the mix: don't be afraid to attack yourself. I mean, if I could give anybody any guidance, don't sit back and simply trust all the security suppliers in the world. I mean, we supply security stuff, but I argue the case all the time. It says the only way to really understand where your risks are is to attack yourself and understand where your risks are, but also understand the efficacy of your security vendors as well. Because just because you've purchased what you think is top of the range firewalls or gateways, and you've got all the policy in the world in place, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to deal with all of these issues. And we have businesses, unfortunately, I've seen this so many times. They simply trust, we've got security in place until suddenly they're hacked.
Right.
So simply by continuously attacking yourself and trying to find out where your weaknesses are, but also where your vendors' weaknesses are as well, because it's great to go back to your supplier and say, hey guys, we've managed to get through your firewall, fix that, or potentially put your price down.
Right.
And I think like Mike Tyson said it best, right? Everybody has a plan when they walk in the ring until I punch him in the face.
Right.
And that's kind of when you think about it from security. I couldn't agree more. I also do think that in today's environment, this isn't something you can go alone. This isn't something you could say, I have a world-class security team. You probably do. But your environment has changed. Your footprint has changed. You're using multi-cloud strategies now. Right. You cannot do this alone.
Right.
Don't be afraid to ask for help. Look to providers who can fill that gap in your team.
I love two things you both gentlemen said. One of them is don't be afraid of testing yourself and trying to hack yourself. And the other one is you can plan as much as you want, but until you put that plan in action, it's just a plan. One of the things I've heard and I've seen major companies do, and Fortune 500, is to make the employee experience and the employee productivity better. I've seen them lower their security standards because their help desk systems, their help desk teams are just like super duper busy right now, right? And hey, I can't install this app. Hey, I put a USB stick, it doesn't work. I've seen literally Fortune 500 lower those standards. I think it's a very dangerous thing, right? Like trying to balance this. Okay, we're tired of answering stupid support tickets, and now I'm just increasing my vectors, right? Are you guys seeing this?
It's a lot of times, and this is one of the most dangerous things that can happen, is that you get overwhelmed by the noise. And that when you set your systems up, you may set thresholds initially that all of a sudden become noise because you see so many tickets, so many issues. But as opposed to going through and investigating the reason why, most security teams will go through and just change the threshold. To your point, exactly, of I'll change my security standard. I'll reduce it a little bit because my security operations team might be overwhelmed.
Right.
It's the wrong approach because it then starts to let in bad actors. One of the key things we've seen in our side of the house are these very short burst, high intensity DDoS attacks that will come in, bang, hit you real fast, shoot a whole lot of traffic at a very high rate to your systems, and then go away. Yeah. Well, most organizations look at that and go, oh, well, the attack, we held it off, it's good. Well, most of the time,
they were probing.
Yeah, most of the times, exactly. They're intended to probe. They're looking for a vulnerability. They're testing if their botnet worked. Something else is coming, and it's just usually a precursor. But if you see too many of those and you change your thresholds, guess what? Next thing you know, you're hacked, you're owned. It's just it's a bad thing to happen. And yes, we see it all the time.
Yeah, it's fatigue, whether it's mask fatigue or alert fatigue, right? Lower the threshold. Well, Steve, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think it also highlights just the historical lack of investment around security teams. That the fact is that suddenly they're put under this bit of pressure, and that's Fortune 500 companies have to make that decision. We've known for years security probably hasn't got its fair share, of the investment pie. And I think it has certainly, highlighted that. We're seeing similar things. We're seeing, different, companies who I thought would have known better have reduced certain policies, especially for remote workers at home, to make it easier for them to get access to critical systems. To the degree we have actually had to come in and basically offer services to them, say, hey, look, guys, don't be doing that. We'll come in and, we'll for free, in fact, because we're a good citizen, we're a good partner. We'll come in and test your network for you. And to Michael's original point, tell you where to prioritize as well, because sometimes you can possibly slacken areas if you know where your priorities are, what you're trying to protect. In many cases, a lot of these networks think, they don't know that, so they're literally blanket protecting everything in day one, which can be sometimes overkill or a misuse of resources if they are limited in that way. So I think there's that sort of trade-off needs to be done, but definitely we are seeing it, and and hopefully it will raise a flag for more spending, investment in security teams for a lot of these companies going forward.
I was shocked when I was, sorry to pile on the SolarWinds guys. I mean, my heart and prayers go to them and what they're dealing with right now. But I was shocked that they didn't even have a chief security officer for a publicly traded company. I was blown away by that. That just goes to your comment, Steve, about the lack of investment in security. Well, companies have to take this very seriously. I mean, if data is the new oil, I mean, what do you do to protect your data?
And and I think it goes a step further. Is the one thing that starts to lack is that you look at this like back in the early or the late 90s, early 2000s, when you saw the internet boom, people were hiring anyone to come in and fill gaps and fill roles who may or may not have had the training. So they're getting on the job training. And you look at studies where Gartner is telling you that there's probably 2 point some odd million unfulfilled jobs by 2022 in the security space. It leans back to two things in my mind. You have to train, you have to start, educating early, but you also have to start correlating these threats. Point solutions aren't going to necessarily solve all your problems anymore. You have to start looking through and figuring out it. And this is one of the things that may have been, could potentially be impacted as a result of COVID. You don't have your security team sitting together. You don't have that banter or that conversation going on where somebody saw something and somebody else may say, hey, hold on a second, I saw X that might have correlated to Y. You're going to have a more heavy reliance on tools, but you're going to have to put more investment into not just the tool, but how are you going to correlate the various noise or alerts that you're getting from those tools so you can get a better view and picture of what's going on for your security in your environment.
Yeah, no, what you said is spot on. I mean, we're in the IT monitoring space, and we're noticing this with the SREs and the Network Operations Center teams using our product, where before they would turn around, it's like, hey, have you noticed that alert? Have you ever seen that before? You turn to your kid watching Netflix, say, have you seen this DDoS attack? That's not going to fly. We have a question in the comment section, so I'm going to read that. Great insight so far. Thank you very much. What do you think the major problems will be for network teams regarding all the smart IoT devices running on home networks that are now also used for businesses?
It's, I mean, dude, I don't know, you don't even know where to begin sometimes with a question like that. I think it goes back to the attack surface, right? Your home network is never going to be as secure as your enterprise network. So, and Mehdi, you brought this up when you were asking this question earlier. How do you then protect that? Well, it then becomes a matter of requiring any access to become over a VPN, something where you can secure the connection between your business systems and your home systems. Because you're never going to be able to, like you had made earlier comment where, the company will buy you maybe a desk or a chair because they know you're working from home now for a long time, but you're probably not going to get them to implement a security system on your network, because the last thing that you need is to break Netflix streaming, or that, your Wi-Fi went down because you put in the company's router. I can't ever see going that path. So it becomes critical to turn that focus into how can I just secure the connection between the device and my corporate infrastructure first. then work on how can now, once I've secured that, now what can I do to start enhancing that level of security?
Yeah. Steve, any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of areas around this. I mean, maybe slightly more futuristic slight areas, and this is something that's coming out of the 5G space at the moment. Is something called network slicing, where you can actually take the single network and virtually slice it into dedicated and secure segments, or as we call them, slices, and resources specifically for different types of use cases. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see these concepts. I mean, we already do this with transport network slicing,
right,
with different types of calls and priority classes. But being able to do it end to end across communication networks could be, is a very powerful potential tool where you could actually, in the home environment, create these dedicated different slices, where you maybe will have ones that are slightly weaker, that are more for the home environments that you're going to use to, while you have more secure ones then for your office types of applications. And you could even have things like quarantine slices, where if there is erroneous traffic identified, you could move it into a network slice to do treatments on it, to actually investigate, is it really an attack? Because, I mean, this is one of the big areas we really saw an issue with in the last few years, was around sort of IoT devices coming onto, especially the cellular networks. For years, we know how you and I use a smartphone. So we know the behavioral patterns of pretty much how people, consume on the smartphone when they're downloading videos, making calls. The patterns are pretty easy to identify for that. Suddenly you have lots of IoT machines communicating. What on earth is a machine's communication meant to look like? Is that an attack? Is that right? And there's all different types of machines. This is not just a few handset devices that we're all used to. Now we're talking about millions of different types of endpoint devices. And suddenly now, as a network provider, trying to identify, is this real? Is this how the machine should behave? Is it an attack? It could be massively complex.
But on this, Steve, we work with a lot of carriers around the world, but is this something that is built into them, where they have the interest and the capability to look at layer 7 traffic and start now being the police of, hey, is this HTTP traffic okay? Is this DNS traffic looking good? Because I agree with you. They, that's where the root is, right? So you could do a lot of interesting things right there. I mean, can a level 3 or CenturyLink or Verizon do stuff at that point and say, hey, this is suspicious, I'm going to block it?
Well, historically, they have done. I mean, they've put in, deep packet inspection capabilities in many networks for years, which were able to identify sort of the traffic mixes and then try to, understand it. Is it an attack, or potentially is it the right traffic? And then you can put policy in place. The challenge, of course, is that's before traffic was ever encrypted to the degree it is now. Now, with the more and more encryption, it's very difficult to use those types of. So now you're into using things like AI and machine learning techniques to try to do inferences to what that traffic pattern and behavior might be like. And I think it comes down to more pattern matching, rather than necessarily being able to fully identify exactly what that traffic necessarily is. And understanding, is the traffic pattern or the behavior of that pattern correct of what we've seen in the past. And we're starting to see more and more people use big data types of analytics to start to do this. But as Michael said, this is only one tool in the toolbox. You need a lot more capabilities than just that there. And it's also outside, in many cases, even your network's capability, because, a big Verizon today is partnering with people like Amazon to host part of their capabilities in Amazon, zones. So all of a sudden you're dependent on partner ecosystems as well, and how they're monitoring and looking for the different types of erroneous behavior on it. And that's why I think this idea of quarantine, quarantine zones might be something we'll see, where you'll see traffic moved into them. It might, we mightn't stop the traffic at this point, but it'll be in a secure area where we can run more forensic types of treatments on it. And if we do think it's okay, we allow it. If not, we sort of, we say, okay, now we've quarantined it, we will stop it. And that's the control mechanisms I think you're going to start to see in sort of these, I suppose, more elastic type of networks that we're moving towards.
I think one of the other, to build on this, that one of the other things that it becomes interesting in this whole type of environment, though, is the fact that there's no one single enterprise uses a single provider for the network. So yes, a network provider could provide the level of security controls, but then if you do so from every network provider that you have, you're now having to put the stress on your teams to manage disparate controls. So the need for someone who can stand outside of that, be some level of network or even cloud agnostic that can look across the various environments, starts to become even more essential. So now you're looking at providers who can be, who can run multi-CDN or security across multi-CDN or multi-network provider, so that you can have a better ability to put a control in place that could potentially do the heavy lifting for your application before then you bring it into your premise or your local WAF that might be there, or your local bot management tools.
Yeah. Now, I think it also speaks again volume to, for example, Microsoft played a critical role yesterday or the day before in helping TAM this SolarWind thing, right? So there is a role that the CDNs, the DNS companies, the cloud companies must play, because they're the ones that are seeing a lot of this traffic, right? So we have a few minutes left. I would love to finish with, I think, the weakest point, I think, in this is the human, right? There is always a human factor, and we tend to overcomplicate things and tools. At the end of the day, the majority of the issues is somebody clicking on a link, somebody opening an attachment, and now the attachment is being opened at home. What do you think companies should do to help the human factor, the human element, be more security centric and more aware?
I think it goes down to a very simple thing. It's education. We've all gone through these types of tests where they'll send you the phishing email internally, and you click on the link, and then you find out who clicked on the link, and you then go and educate. I think in this environment, the only thing you can do is up the training, up the education, require additional reviews of videos, send more phishing links out. I think Steven said it best. It doesn't hurt to test yourself. Right. It doesn't hurt to attack yourself. It's going to be, you can't assume that you can put a control in place that's going to solve it for everyone. And the only way to block malicious phishing attempts, intelligence can help, can give you insights into what's happening, even if it's when you're looking at domain level intelligence. But the majority of this is going to come from training. Just I think Herm Edwards used to say about sports figures, when they would send out tweets, and his word was, don't press send. Just don't press send. Well, I would say the same thing. Don't click. Just don't click on the link.
Yeah. Steve, any comments on that?
I was going to take it to the next step, maybe just slightly further than that, and just say, and educate your family. I mean, we do a lot of this training for our staff. As Michael said, we do phishing attacks, to see who clicks on it. We run that, but we ask then, we've gradually started getting to the stage. We just ask our people, when you go home and you're speaking to your husband, your wife, your kids, educate them. Tell them that this is what Daddy was doing today. And so if you ever see an email that looks like this, don't do that, and just build in the best practices. Going forward. I mean, it was really interesting. I mean, the amount of sort of scams and phishing attacks we started to see around COVID was unbelievable. People impersonating health officials, calling people up, trying to get access to your systems. In many cases, also, people in the industry are, have the knowledge. We forget sometimes the weakest link is actually as our family. And now we're in home network environments where we're sharing. Sometimes it's just a case of make sure that they are as educated as the stuff that we're learning and teaching people. But I agree with Michael. It's constant education. And I think, and as I said earlier on, test yourself. It doesn't hurt to test yourself to find out where your weaknesses are.
Yeah. Steve, that was unbelievable. So I hope there are companies listening that are in the training business on this podcast and videocast. Please come up with training material for the houses, for the families, how to tell a 4-year-old and how to educate a 4-year-old, a 10-year-old, and 14-year-old not to click on a link. I think that this is one of the things I'm going to try to do tonight, Steve. Thank you very much for that advice. Gentlemen, this was unbelievable. Not only to meet you, from Los Angeles to London to Virginia here. Any last few words, Steve and Michael, on before we close this?
I would say that the world's changed. We're not going backwards, so you can expect that you're going to need to evolve with it. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to reach out, and look for the things that are most important to your business and focus there first.
Thank you. Steve?
I think the only thing I would say was that look for the positive in all of this, because this has been a horribly hard year for a lot of people. But I think what we've seen is a lot of the remote working environments dealing with this has accelerated probably a lot of really beneficial things that are going to come in the future, such as remote learning, allowing people to work from home, have better work-life balances, allowing businesses to probably drive better efficiencies with technologies like automation. And I think if we can embrace the things that we've had to rapidly put in place to deal with it, and we can make sure it's secure, I think this could be, it's like any major world event, innovation will come out of it, and we've already started to see that. And I think we should now just, really embrace and drive that innovation forward, because as much as everything's been bad, I have seen a lot of positives come out of it, positives that I think will do wonders for this world.
Absolutely. I mean, from pollution to less air travel to all kind of things, I think there are going to be a lot of amazing things. Well, I want to thank my panelists. I also want to thank all the folks that joined the Solution Review event today. A huge thank you to all the network engineers out there, all the security professionals out there, because in the grand scheme of things, the network and the internet has been pretty stable, knock on wood. So thank you for allowing us to work remotely. Thank you for allowing us to entertain our families remotely, and keeping the sanity that that we all need these days. So thank you to all the professionals in the network, in the security field. You guys are doing a great job, and with the nurses and the doctors, you're the unsung heroes of this pandemic crisis. So thank you for that. Happy holidays to everyone, and Happy New Year.
Same.